Hello, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, which is a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Our mantra is educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guest may not represent those of the station or the host. Folks, you are going to want to listen to my phenomenal guest today. I have phenomenal guests, and I learn from every single guest, but I am just super excited because my guest wrote such an awesome book about a woman, Mary Lasker. And I'll tell you, you need to read this book. And I'm going to tell you about my guest first, because sometimes my mouth goes ahead of my brain. Judith likes to be called Judy, but if you were looking for her book, she is Judith L. Pearson. That's spelled Pearson. And she wrote this wonderful book, Crusade to Heal America, The Remarkable Life of Mary Lasker. Now, Judith was on 2 years ago with her wonderful book, From Shadows to Life, a biography of the cancer survivorship movement, which won the 2022 Nautilus Gold Award. And Judy has also written Wolves at the Door, The True Story of America's Greatest Female Spy, and Belly of the Beast, a POW story of faith, courage, and survival aboard a WW2 hell ship. Judy also had a diagnosis of triple-negative breast cancer that led Judy to found that's the letter A, Second Act, a nonprofit that raises funds for survivors ready to launch or grow their second acts after cancer. In 2014, she was honored in Washington, D.C. by the American Association for Cancer Research, a former member of the Society of Integrative Oncology and the American Psychosocial Oncology Society. She is a graduate at Michigan State University, and she just moved to Florida. I want to welcome you, Judy. Busy woman.
Thank you so much. Yes, here we are, just in a slice of heaven. My husband swims in the Gulf every morning with dolphins, like they just follow him.
That's cool. That has to be really cool to see that. But tell your husband to watch out for sharks.
Well, the good news is dolphins are the vital or the enemy of sharks. And so as long as the dolphins are nearby, the sharks will stay away. And because I'm kind of woo-woo, I think the dolphins like humans, and that's why they swim with the swimmers every day.
Yes, they do. I believe that they do like humans. Judy, I told Judy before we recorded, I was talking to Judy. I have to tell you, go on YouTube, which I did, because I wanted to hear Mary Lasker. I wanted to hear her voice. So go on YouTube and look up Mary Lasker. But I want to ask you, as I always ask all the authors, how did you come up with, or how did you find Mary Lasker, and why did you want to tell her story, which is so phenomenal?
Thank you so much. Well, it actually, when Star Wars first came out, George Lucas told the world at the time, that this was really the center, this was going to be an end part of his series, and then he went back and told the beginning. And so that's kind of what I accidentally did with Mary. My last book that you and I talked about a couple years ago that you just mentioned, From Shadows to Life, begins with Mary Lasker shepherding through the National Cancer Act in 1971. And the little bit of research I did about her for that book absolutely ignited a fire under me. And it was just not even a question of if, but how fast could I get to researching and telling her story. I could hardly wait to get into it. So this is actually the prequel to that book. This one, the culmination of her citizen lobbyist career was the National Cancer Act.
Mary was ahead of her time. She was a mover
Absolutely.
and a shaker.
Yep.
So ahead of her time. And folks, I want you to go on Amazon.com and look up this book. I love book covers, and I was telling Judy that I love the book cover, and I have to ask you, how did you discover this picture and why you chose this picture? Because this picture nails Mary's personality. She has the look like, you just go ahead and tell me no and see what happens.
Well,
I love this picture.
It's kind of funny. I have a T-shirt that says, "Underestimate me. That'll be fun," and that's kind of what this picture epitomizes.
Yes,
absolutely. And Mary, full disclosure, when Mary was a successful businesswoman, but when she married Albert Lasker, she became phenomenally wealthy, and they were both very philanthropic their entire lives, both together and before their marriage. But the philanthropy was not what Mary should be known for, because it's easy to give money away. It's much harder to move the federal government. So this particular photo was taken the day after they were married in 1940, and the photographer was a very well-known British photographer. The photo itself actually lives at the National Gallery in London. So as I was collecting photos from various sources, and because Mary knew so many presidents and congressmen and celebrities, there were lots to choose from. But my wonderful editor at Mayo Clinic Press and I decided, both separately and then couldn't believe how adamant we both were, that this be on the cover. So I had to chase this down to London. Unfortunately, I had to do it virtually. I didn't actually go to London. Dang. But I just think Albert somehow found out about this photographer and said that, you know, he insisted that she take Mary's picture, and I'm sure he paid her, the photographer, handsomely for it. But it is the most perfect picture for the cover.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I'm going to quote Mary Lasker from your book, because this tells you the heart, I feel, the heart of her personality. I am opposed to heart disease and cancer the way one is opposed to sin. She was a fighter, and as wealthy as she was, and as much as she did, she was humble. She didn't want to be known for what she did. She was like more behind the scenes of doing that, the work that she did. I mean, just her life from, you know, she was married before Albert, and she dealt with, it was her ex-husband was an alcoholic. Wasn't he the first husband?
Yep, and I think he also suffered from pretty severe depression as well. And,
you know, mental illness, which was not discussed at that time at all. Neither was cancer. That was like, ooh, you don't mention, you know, the C word.
That's right. That's right.
That was a big, you know, they would whisper it, thought it was contagious. And she was just a fighter. But I have to ask you, as part of this interview, and like I said, my brain, either my mouth or my brain go ahead of each other. How did she become interested in fighting cancer and heart disease? I mean, I know. I just want you to tell the audience.
Right. So her first exposure to heart disease, or excuse me, to cancer, was when she was a little girl. And just as a quick side note, Mary gave an oral history. The recordings spanned 3 decades. She asked that they not be released until after her death, which occurred in 1994. And they lived at Columbia University, which had the fabulous foresight to transcribe them. So I was able to, and it's available, the entire series is available online. There are many typographical errors, name misspellings. The names are very often, the index is not terribly clear, but there's 2,000 pages in total, but it was a wealth of information for me. So when I would recount then these anecdotes in the book, it was coming firsthand from Mary. So when she was a little girl, her father was a very successful banker in a small town in Wisconsin, so the family had money, and they had a laundress who lived in town but not with them. And her mother took her one day when she was about 5 or 6, so this would have been like around 1906, 1905, to visit the laundress who had breast cancer and had a mastectomy. And her mother was explaining to Mary that they were visiting Mrs. Belter because of this. And Mary said she stopped dead in her tracks and looked at her mother and said, "You mean they cut off her breast?" And her mother said, yes, that's what they had to do to save her life. And Mary's description of this woman lying on a low cot with this assemblage of children standing around her, all looking pitiful. I kind of think of, the Cratchit family in one of the Christmas Carol movies. And Mrs. Belter, we never know whether she lived or died, but that image so stuck with Mary that she just decided there was no way she was going to let this go on. And if and when, and it was solidified, she also had the Spanish flu, the pandemic of 1918. And so that just solidified in her mind that when she was able, she was going to try to make a difference. By the time she married Albert, his brother had died of cancer, and the two of them discovered this great passion for public health. But in 1940, 75% of all deaths came as a result of heart disease and cancer. And everyone just threw up their hands and said, well, it's God's will. If they're going to die, they're going to die. There's nothing to be done. And Mary just felt that was the most ridiculous resolution to something, that there must be something that could be done.
We need Mary Lasker today. We need several of them.
Yes, ma'am.
In today's world for all the, especially one for Alzheimer's. But I was just so, I guess I really admired her strength, going what she went through. Albert had cancer, and she still, went on. Even after Albert's death, she was still very much involved. She didn't stop.
No, and in a typical Mary fashion, she said in her oral history that his death really took the wind out of her sails, and I can not even imagine, never having experienced that, but I know how heartbroken I would be if something happened to my husband. So she took the summer off that year. He died on Memorial Day, and she took the summer off. And then when Congress came back into session in September, it was 1952, she really went back to work with a vengeance. She was really on it at that point in time.
But you know what? That's funny you said that, Judy, because I was just going to say, boy, we're on the same wavelength. I was just going to say, I bet you went back just ready to bulldoze, with such strength, her way through.
Absolutely. And it was interesting in all the research that I did. So between Mary's oral history, as I mentioned, a squillion books, plus spending a lot of time at the National Archives reading through the congressional records, which are housed at the archives in D.C., what comes through clearly is the fact that cancer and heart disease are not political. Republicans and Democrats suffer from those diseases equally. And very often, a member of Congress who was a roadblock would call her up and have a change of heart. And invariably, one guy in particular called her. He was not going to help her with her funding. And when he called her back in, she said, I don't understand. Why have you changed your mind? And his answer was, my mother was just diagnosed with cancer. So it's one of those situations where it seems ridiculous for people to dig their heels in and not want to fund medical research. They only have to experience it themselves before they understand the desperation you feel when you get a diagnosis.
Oh, that is absolutely true. Absolutely.
And the government was not, in 1942, when Mary first, 41, I guess, when Mary first started going to congressional hearings, the government did not spend any money, like as in zero, on medical research. And neither, really, did the American Cancer Society, which was known as the American Society to Control Cancer, or the major universities. It was sort of a chicken or the egg thing. They weren't researching because there weren't any great ideas to follow up on, and there weren't any great ideas because no one was researching to get ideas. And so there just was nothing.
And this shows, folks, how one person can change the world, can change things. People think, oh, I don't have a voice, I can't change anything. Read Mary Lasker. Read about Mary Lasker. And
that's right.
What a role model for not just women, but for everyone to speak up, stand up for what you believe. And when you have a passion for a cause, it can really, it does have a ripple effect. And it's still to today having a ripple effect. I was really surprised to see Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital mentioned in your book, because I didn't know that hospital was way back when. I didn't know that hospital was that old. I thought it was, maybe in the 70s, but it's been around longer than that.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Same thing with what's now known as Roosevelt University. In Mary's time, it was called the Roosevelt Institute, and it also was created for medical research, but many doctors in the early part of the 20th century had to go to Europe to do research because, again, as I said, there was none being done in the U.S., and that's pretty amazing considering that we were at the time such an industrial giant. But what really sort of made the government sit up and take notice was the massive amounts of money that was being spent during World War II. Well, first of all, 40% of all World War II enlistees were rejected for medical reasons. So the government realized those men, because they were almost all men, those men who were able to fight needed to be taken care of. So they started all this medical research for the different diseases that the men encountered, whether it was from being in wet trenches or fighting through the jungle in the Pacific. They started doing all this research to help and for battle wounds and to prevent gangrene and other infections. So they did this research, and Mary realized that money should then be used for the civilian population once the war had ended.
Yes. And, it makes sense, Judy, that spending money on research for prevention would be much more cost-effective than for treatment. Let's prevent these diseases to begin with.
Right. Or at the very least,
back,
at the very least, diagnose them early before they got too problematic.
Yes. And back in those days, the meat, there was a lot of, you were able to eat meat, right? People ate a lot of meat, potatoes, rich foods, especially if they could, afford to. Not everybody, but there wasn't, low cholesterol diet, I believe, back then. And just a little side note, when I was 16, 17, back in 1974, 75, I worked in a nursing home. And these people were 65 and up, but Mary, they looked, I'm not Mary, Judy, sorry. Judy,
That's okay.
They looked old. They looked old. And here I am, going to be 66 next month. I'm thinking, wow, they were my age. That's a scary thought.
Are you ready for a nursing home?
No. No, I am not.
Me either.
And I just loved Mary's gusto and how she was very politically connected. I mean, she had Lady Bird Johnson. She knew the Kennedys. She knew the Roosevelts. She was, had these extravagant dinner parties to get funding. She would get people together, as you know from, because you wrote the book. And I just thought that she was really smart to do that. She would bring people together for them to know each other and also to be able to get the funding that she needed.
Well,
for
she had a recipe.
The research.
She had a recipe for her table assignments, and she they would be tables of 4, and at each table was a politician, a journalist, a celebrity, and a scientist. The politician was interested in talking to the journalist to get positive press. The journalist wanted the latest story from the celebrity. The celebrity wanted to know, the celebrity wanted to learn more about medical research, and the medical researcher was told the only person that was important at the table was the politician, because he was going to be able to make the money happen. And typically scientists, I don't want to offend any listeners, but scientists aren't always the most gregarious of people. So there's a couple of scientists, researchers who I spoke with in writing this and researching this book, said that was always the hardest for them because they were so starstruck by the celebrity, but had to keep remembering why they'd been invited to this very fancy dinner.
I thought that was really smart of her. Mary was so wise and getting people together, and not only did she create this wonderful funding and the research, which is still going on today, but she also came up with the original moonshot for cancer. Can you tell the audience about that?
She did. When President Kennedy was elected, he, of course, said one of his goals was to land a man on the moon by the end of the decade, which was the 1960s. And so then, of course, his life was cut short. But because Mary knew Lyndon Johnson as a senator before he became vice president, it was pretty handy then that she could go in and speak with him. And NASA was working on the moon project, the Apollo project, and she said to Johnson, we're exploring outer space. We should be exploring inner space, as in the human body. But what she was really intrigued by was NASA, because the National Aeronautical and Space Administration, NASA doesn't answer to any other federal organization. It answers only to the president. And she said, we need a cancer organization set up exactly like that. There is too much bureaucracy the National Cancer Institute has to answer to the National Institutes of Health, who has to answer to public health, there's all these layers. And so by the time NCI, the Cancer Institute, can hire a new researcher, it's been weeks since he's been interviewed, and he's had to move on to find another job. We've got to cut this bureaucracy and create a NASA-like organization. And that's where the whole moonshot idea came from. A lot of people give President Clinton, President Obama, President Biden credit. That's not true. It was Mary Lasker. It was her idea. The same thing is true about the war on cancer. No one ever actually said that. When Mary was persuading politicians to persuade President Nixon to sign the National Cancer Act in 1971, the journalists came up with this idea of declaring war on cancer. No one said it, but it somehow then got attributed to Ted Kennedy, Senator Kennedy, to President Nixon, and now again to all these other presidents afterwards. But all of that came about because of Mary. And she did, you said earlier, Betsy, that she wanted to remain in the background. She called herself a catalytic agent. And she had her naysayers who insisted that she was only doing it for the fame, which was about as real. She certainly didn't need the money, and she didn't want the fame. That she wasn't interested in that at all, which is why no one's ever written about her. She was not interested in being famous. She was interested in curing cancer.
Yes, and she not only, talked the talk, but walked the walk. And I remember in the book when interferon was coming about,
correct,
and she sold a painting of hers to get funding.
Sold a collection of them, in fact.
A collection.
Yeah.
Wow.
So interferon is derived from, it comes from human blood, and it can only work in humans from human blood. Very often we can use animal byproducts, and interferon doesn't work that way. The blood has to be centrifuged a number of times. The amount of money it costs to get just a small amount, it was terrific. But it was thought at the time that perhaps that would be the silver bullet. It was only being researched in Scandinavia. So Mary sold a collection of Fujita paintings. Fujita was a Japanese painter, but he grew up in France and was an impressionist. And his paintings were very popular in Japan. They had been brought to the U.S. or sent to the U.S. and purchased here post-war, but the Japanese were interested in buying them. So she sold the equivalent of $4 million worth of paintings.
Wow.
In order to send a little group over to Scandinavia, not only to buy what they could, but then to bring it back and start researching it here. And then once word got out that she had done that, then both the American Cancer Society and NCI, National Cancer Institute, started researching it as well.
Now that's what I call putting your, what's the saying? Putting your mouth where your money is? Your money where your mouth is.
Money where your mouth is, that's right.
That's it.
That's right.
Yes, absolutely. I tell you, folks, sometimes I'm at a loss of words to explain myself, but Mary Lasker, and I never heard of Mary Lasker before until reading this book. She comes to life in this book, and Judy, you did a wonderful job, really.
Oh, thank you.
Of telling Mary Lasker's story, and it's ironic. The bad things, the unfortunate things that happened to her, like her second husband, even though he was a lot older than her, they had a wonderful marriage, they traveled around, and he developed cancer. And she, through her sorrow, she still wanted to find a cure, even more so. and, with heart disease, which, and she wanted to work on mental health also, which I believe if she was alive today, she probably would have done something in that area. And I really believe she probably would have spoken up about Alzheimer's. I really do believe that.
One of the researchers, Dr. Jordan Gutterman, who was one of the researchers on the Interferon project, said to me that mental health needs a Mary Lasker, needs someone as driven to bring mental health out of the shadows as well, because and mental health is such an like cancer, it's such an enormous umbrella. Mary believed that cancer was just one disease, and she said a simple pill for a simple doctor to give to a suffering patient, that's all we need. And, of course, we know that cancer is over 100 diseases. Mental health is very similar. It's it's so hard to study the human brain with the human brain, because you can study cadaver brains, but there's very little that you can do. You can do some work researching those who have mental illness and who are still alive, but it's just, there's so much involved, and it's such a huge topic that it needs a Mary Lasker. There's no doubt about it.
Yes, and I feel, like the same, people don't know about Alzheimer's and other dementias. There's many, many different types of dementia. I tell people, just like cancer, and there's many different types of cancer, there's many different types of dementia. We need a Mary Lasker.
That's right.
And that field also. And Mary loved flowers, and I was really amazed that she planted or had flowers planted in New York City to beautify the city.
She was so multifaceted. In one interview, she said that artwork and flowers, the beauty in both of those were they were her escape from the difficulties and the darkness of disease, which is where she spent so many of her hours. Artwork, of course, you can see it in galleries and museums, but having a private art collection, you have to obviously have a certain level of wealth. Flowers, on the other hand, beautifying a city was something that everyone could enjoy, and it worked perfectly with the project that Lady Bird Johnson, when she was First Lady, that she embarked on, beautifying America. It was the perfect combination. So my very first book signing was in Phoenix, which is where I lived before we moved here. And as I was signing a book, a woman came up to me and said, "I'm so glad to meet you." And I said, "Well, thank you. Likewise. Who are you?" She started telling me about an organization called the Park Avenue Fund. Mary started planting the median down Park Avenue in the 1950s. She thought that the city was just so unattractive and European cities were so beautiful, and her intention was to plant New York just like the rest of the big cities in the world. So she funded their tulips and daffodils and tulips, and then had a special variety of mum created that would be more cold weather hardy and be able to live even into the first frost. After Mary died, this group got together and created the Fund for Park Avenue, and this woman who was at my Phoenix book signing lives in Phoenix and does their website. So she connected me to the woman who is now the CEO of the fund, and when I was in New York as a part of the early part of my book tour, I got to meet Barbara and hear all about how really intent they are on keeping this mission going.
That's beautiful. I I haven't been in the city in many, many years, but I just was really thrilled to have read that she, wanted these flowers to beautify New York City. And Judy, can you tell us about the Lasker Foundation, because that is still going on today and has a huge part with Nobel Peace Prize winners that I was excited to read about that.
Correct. So Albert and Mary started the foundation in 1942. Albert was looking for research, what he called research bargains. People, again, at the time, there was no research being done. He wanted to give a little seed money to these researchers to get them started. So the original prizes, the foundation was started in 1940, but the prizes came about for the first time in 1942, and they gave $1,000 prizes for basic research, clinical research. Over the years, they've done journalist awards for medical writing and a variety of other humanitarian awards. Now the prizes are $250,000, so they're now in their, let's see, help me do the math, 81st year, and they are absolutely called the American Nobels. 95 of the Lasker winners have gone on to win Nobel Prizes. The luncheon is very much like it used to be. I was invited to this year's luncheon. It's invitation only. They've held it at a variety of hotels. It's been at the Pierre for the last couple of years. It was September 29th of this year, which was when New York had that catastrophic rainstorm where rain was pouring into all the subway tunnels. So I got my pretty on and had a cab pick me up at my hotel, but oh man, water was running in the streets. It was a lovely, lovely luncheon, and it was really, I was very honored to be there, and they had a big table of books, and it was really wonderful.
That is really that is cool. That is wonderful, and I do remember that rainstorm actually.
Oh man!
I live in New Jersey. Yeah, I had to bail out some water myself with that event. Judy, there's so much more to discuss, but our time is up, and I want to encourage the audience to please purchase this book. Read about Mary Lasker. You will be so encouraged. You'll want to go out and do something. You really will.
Let me just share with your readers. The prologue or your listeners, the prologue is available on my website, judithlpearson.com, and the L is important because, amazingly, there are other Judith Pearsons who are writers. If you come across somebody who writes about cats or marriage counseling, that is not me. I only write biographies. And if they'd like to have an autographed copy, all they have to do, there's a button on the book page on my website, and they just fill out a little form, and I'll send them an adhesive book plate that they can put inside the book. It's make a great Christmas gift. And I can't guarantee that my signature will increase the value, but at least they'll know whose book it is.
That's cool. That is really cool. And your book is available on Amazon.com. Can they order the book from your? Oh, okay. Can they order it from your website or Amazon.com or something?
Not from my website, but on my website I have links to Barnes & Noble online.
Oh, okay.
To other independent booksellers and Amazon. It's available at brick and mortar and online.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. And what would you like the reader to take away from this wonderful biography?
I think you've sort of alluded to it. It's my favorite quote that Margaret Mead said, that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, concerned citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And that just summarizes Mary's belief, I think, and her personality and her drive perfectly.
Yes, that is very true. People have gotten together. I remember your book, reading about the cancer survivorship, and I thought that was a wonderful movement. Yes. Sorry about that. Movement. I thought that was a wonderful book and really a blueprint for other organizations or other people who have other diseases that want to start a movement. That is just a really good foundation to look at and to read about. And the book, folks, I'm going to say the name of the book again, is Crusade to Heal, that's H-E-A-L, America, The Remarkable Life of Mary Lasker. That's Lasker by Judith L. Pearson, Pearson. Folks, go get the book, read about this remarkable woman, and that's really an understatement. She was more than remarkable. We need Mary Laskers today. And I highly recommend going on Judy's website and go Google. You know, I'd like to encourage the audience to educate themselves. Go on Google. Go on YouTube. I did both. And it's really cool to hear Mary's voice. And, I mean, the research that you've done is phenomenal, just phenomenal. And you're welcome. I thank you for coming on today, Judy, and for doing the research and writing this wonderful, phenomenal book, which inspired me. And I really enjoyed reading it and really was blessed by reading your book. So
Betsy,
another home run.
Betsy,
You're
thank
welcome.
you so much for the kind words and for having me on. It's been great.
Oh, you are welcome. It is my honor, really my pleasure. Folks, I want to thank you for listening today. Please share this show to help other people. You know what? I love to listen about people from all different types of life, walks of life. And Mary Lasker is one person that I think people need to know about. And you will definitely be inspired and moved by her story. It is really very inspiring. And I encourage everyone to get a copy and read it, buy it as a gift, and you can get an autograph. And the information about Judy Pearson will be in the blog that Jeannie White, the station manager, writes. So thank you, Jeannie, for writing the blog and producing the show. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, who's CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. And again, thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. And if you haven't already subscribed to Chatting with Betsy, it is for free on iHeart, Spreaker, Spotify, Amazon Music. I think every guest on my show will help you in your life. And I just want to encourage everyone to subscribe. And thanks again for listening. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind, shine your light bright, because we sure need it today. And if we all did that, it would be a much brighter kind of world. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. So we chat again. Be safe, everyone. Bye-bye now.